Hi, very good morning. It's Jim from Avstar. You know, there were two reasons really for creating this channel. One mainly was for the magnetic pole shift, but the other one was to share some of the thoughts I have, because I don't think I'm like everybody else. Sometimes, most of the times I am, but sometimes I'm not, because I have very deep thoughts. And I wanted to talk to you guys about something completely different to what we normally do, and that is, I got a bad feeling about the direction in which humanity is moving right now, at this point in time. And it's to do with something that we've created and we're developing, and that is robotics. And my biggest problem with the robotics that we're building is that they look very much human-like. And I got a feeling inside of me that we are probably offending God. And I just want to read this out in the Genesis chapter 1. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have domination over the fish of the seas, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over everything that creepeth upon the earth." And chapter 20, verse 27 and 28 is, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, that male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have domination over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And this was his sixth day of work on the earth. And on the seventh, he rested. He did not work. You can read that for yourselves. So his final creation was man in the image of himself. And you know what I find, I believe that we're doing is no service to God and no respect by creating robotics now that look like human beings. But we're not just creating machines that look like human beings, we are giving them artificial intelligence, and it's like we're trying to better. And some scientists and engineers say that they will be better than human beings themselves. And the big point of this is that God created us in his image. And I think that maybe we are offending him by trying to better that image. You know, if it's true what the scientists and engineers say, that these humanoid robots will be able to think faster than us, work harder and longer than us, then, you know, are we going to give over the domination of our earth that we was given by God over to the robots eventually? Could we be making one of the biggest mistakes ever since the day we were put on this earth? Because, you know, I do find human beings ourselves naive, and we can be subdued to temptations of things, you know, from day one to this very day present. If we look at how people behave today, then corruption is something that they have learned to overcome. You know, it's even bred into generations of children that, you know, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, taking the labour of many people and rewarding them very little for it. There is no shame. And, you know, generations of families will put that thought into their heads that if you have conscience, you will not be able to maintain your wealth. That a certain amount of cruelty, a certain amount of behaviour, wickedness, will ensure and endow you with wealth for the rest of your life and generations to come. And you know, if we go, that's looking at today, and if we look back at the very, very beginning of how susceptible and easy it was to manipulate human beings because of our pure nature of, inquisitiveness. Look at what happened in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And it was that very thing that upset God a little bit, because God said to them in the Garden of Eden, have everything you want, but not off that fruit, off that single tree. Don't touch it. And of course, Eve was by the tree the one day, and the snake was there, and he said, you can eat off this tree, you will not die, and the fruit is good. Try it, and he persuaded Eve to eat off the tree, and she did, and she said it was good. And then she went to Adam and offered Adam the apple, and then said it was from the forbidden tree, and look, we haven't died. But later on in that story, God is walking through Eden, and he's looking for Adam and Eve, and they're hiding, and he says to them, why are you hiding? And Adam turns around, he says, because I'm naked. And God knew at that very point that they had eaten from the tree that was forbidden, because they now had knowledge of what it was like to be naked, as opposed to before they'd eaten off that fruit from that tree, not knowing what nakedness was. And God said, why have you eaten from the tree, to Adam? And Adam said, because Eve brought the fruit to me, and she says it was good, and there was nothing wrong with it. And God then turned to Eve and said, why did you eat from the tree? And she said, because the fruit was good, and I was told that by the snake in the tree, that I would surely not die if I ate from it. And God knew at that point what they was both trying to do, which was also part and parcel of receiving knowledge. It was also knowledge of how to pass the book. And God saw that they was both trying to deceive him and not be honest, because he'd give clear instructions what not to do and what to do, and they'd broken that. And God knew that they was both trying to justify eating, but not only justify the eating of that fruit off the tree, they was both trying to put the blame on each other. Adam blamed Eve, and Eve had blamed the snake. But getting back to this, I think it's a bad move, because that inquisitiveness, that innocence about human beings, I think is something that is part of our DNA. We can be the shrewdest person on the planet, but we will all be fooled by the greatest magician. And what do I mean by that? I believe that in years to come, if we continue down the path of creating humanoid robots, that man will eventually, and woman, will eventually take these robots as their partners in life, as opposed to their opposite or their counterparts in life. So males will, take on these robots, female robots that look female. They'll just be machines, but man will take them, because this machine will not only be able to cook him whatever meal he so chooses, but it will also give him company and never argue with him, ever. And vice versa for women as well. This robot will do everything they say, and it will be better to the populations at that time than having a real relationship, because this robot will never be entitled during a divorce or a separation to anything. So there'll be no sharing, so greed will be, on the increase at that point in time. And it will be one of the reasons why, people would choose the company of robotics over, the company of human beings. So we are, I believe, already on that path, because now, there are the fundamental things working against us in society that are, now not only have they split countries amongst each other, the countrymen and women against each other, they've now filtrated down into the cities and split, the women from the men, and now they've worked into the towns and the villages. And then it didn't stop there. It came into our living rooms and destroyed, the family within those four walls. So, it is my opinion, that on the last day that God decided to work, he created one of his best creations. And it was only that creation that he created in man and woman that he did it not only as a creation, but he did it in his own image. Think about that. He put really his signature on us. This is going to be the best. It's my last day of work, and I want to create the very best. And it's going to be in my form and in my likeness. And he did so. And now we're moving down a path where we are trying to do better than God, in that we are trying to improve on his very last day of work. In that he created man in his image, and now we're trying to create something better than what God created, and scientists and engineers believe that that will be the case. And that's the road we're moving along right now. And that worries me. And, I should be, thinking more along the lines as a scientist. And I know that people would say you can't mix the two together. You can't bring in religion and you can't mix science because they both go against each other. But in my knowledge, and I came, my mum was Catholic. And she never imposed a religion on me whatsoever, and I only came into the words and workings of the Bible when I was in my mid to late 20s. And I, as a scientist, realised something very, very quickly, having been pestered by a friend of mine to take up reading the Bible, and I did. And I thought it's very interesting because there is a lot of science in the words of the Bible that probably a lot of people would never have even spotted. But after just reading the first chapter, I was convinced that this was by no mistake. And even the talks of the creating of the heavens and the earth held a deep knowledge of science. And it had caught my attention. And that's why, today, many years later, I've read that book more than 5 times, and I don't remember every chapter, every verse, of the book, but I remember a lot of the stories. And off the top of my head, I just talked about Genesis, the very first chapter of the Bible, from just knowledge of memory. But it is a concern of mine that maybe we are being a little bit hasty in creating these robotics in the human form. And I just want to know why. Why have we chosen to create them in the human form? And I did notice a couple of videos ago when I lightly touched on this subject, that someone had said, well, it'd be easier to accept as a human being something in a humanoid form. And is that because somebody is trying to convince us and is going largely out of their way to make us accept these things? I don't want to mention the trickery of the devil, but if someone said that it was the devil that was creating this, and he knew that it would upset God because humans were created on the very last day before God, on the 6th day, before God took rest. So we were created we were not only his last creation, but we was also created in his own image, which I think is the main point here. And that what we're trying to do is now create a machine in our image. But it's not just our image, remember that. We are creating also an intimidation of our God, which is, in my view, an abomination. It's something that we should never do, and I think that we are definitely crossing the threshold of something we should not be. If we all had a second chance, I'm sure that we would never have eaten off that tree, and we would have remained in the Garden of Eden to this day. But, you know, that moment has come and gone. For those people that might be tempted in the future to have these robots around them, I just want to also mention one thing. That when God first created man, he realised that he was lonely. So he cast a sleep upon Adam. And whilst Adam was asleep, he removed a bone from his rib. And with that rib, he created Eve. And he created Eve for company for man. But, you know, I want to mention why that is very scientifically accurate in the fact that God chose to take the rib. Because, you know, within the rib is the DNA. And yes, you know, in science now we've discovered that there is only one way to change your DNA, and that is by a bone marrow transplant. Did you know that? You can change your DNA by having a bone marrow transplant. Because it is within the bone is where the real pure DNA is. And that's why God chose to take the rib from Adam, because it was with the rib he could create the female. All the genetic material was there. And he did it for company for Adam. Yeah? Now, what man is trying to do in this modern day and age is create better company than Eve, quite clearly. And man will do it. You know, if you have, you know, a desire to be in very intelligent company, and that also be a female company or a male company, then what better company could you be in? Well, these robotics with artificial intelligence will have exactly that. And more so, that you will be able to design, you know, the woman in which your thoughts, you know, the beauties aren't in the eye of the perceiver, they say, and you will be able to create your partner, male or female, whichever you choose, to the way you feel or the way you interpret what you see as beauty, and therefore you will satisfy yourself. But not only that, will it be a servant to you and do everything you ask it to, but you will also be able to hold high-level intellectual conversations and also be more intelligent than you. And then when you are about to make mistakes, it will prompt you that you are about to do that, and it will tell you exactly the reasons why you shouldn't do, and maybe, you know, guide you from, you know, financial peril or, you know, life-threatening things that could possibly come up in your life. You know, bad diet, you know, don't go on this trip because the odds are this vehicle is said to be dangerous, and you know, the odds are too high, so choose another method. You know, that sort of thing. And I think it's very dangerous territory. And I think it's insulting to God. And, you know, there is no reason why humanoid robots need to look like human beings. It's only the choice that we make them look like that. And I ask the question, why does it need to? You know, I do feel it's offensive what we've done. And there is room for change. We can divert from this path, but I'm just thinking we probably won't, because we're very inquisitive in nature as a human being. We always have been for thousands and thousands of years. And corruption is a disease, I believe. It's passed on to generation to generation. That's why, these oligarchs, as we call them, have always been in the, position of great wealth. And it's a very sad time we're in. And it doesn't look like we're going to deviate off this path by any means, because there isn't knowledge of things like what I've mentioned today widely spread. Why has not one single media outlet said, whoa, aren't we stepping on God's toes here? Are we not insulting him? Do people forget the fact that we were born into this world by God and created in his own image? And look what we're doing. We're trying to better not only the image that he created, but remember, he created us, human beings, in his own image. So are we trying to better God? Do better than God? We need to think about this. I bet you've probably never heard anyone else on YouTube or any other social media talk about this very fact. So, on that note, think about what I've said. If you're a believer in God, if you have belief, then what do you think about what I've spoke about in this video? Tell me in the comment section. I could have easily spent the time talking about other matters. Just briefly, I'll give you, for instance, for one, I don't think Donald Trump is such a very good deal maker, and I'll tell you why. Because if he was a shrewd businessman, which I don't think he is, because clearly he likes to stand before a camera and he likes the popularity of his position. If he was such a good businessman, he would not be broadcasting his strategic plans to the world. And I'll tell you why he wouldn't do that. Because as soon as you broadcast your intentions on any strategic level, you have just told your opponents your plans. And that is like them having a crystal ball. This is what Donald Trump is planning to do. This is how it's going to affect us. We need to put this measure in place. Now, if he'd have kept it to himself and not broadcast it, but just did it, that would have been a different matter, because his opponents would have been just thinking about what is his next steps and guessing. But Donald Trump has confirmed what he's intending on doing, and therefore told his strategic plans to everybody in the world. And that, to me, is not a shrewd and smart businessman. Because the moment you broadcast what you're about to do is the moment that somebody will put countermeasures in place. Donald Trump should be thinking about his strategic global e-commerce moves more like a battle plan. Now, you wouldn't go telling the world what your ambitions are and your plans in war. You wouldn't do that. But there is no difference between, business plans and at a strategic level. If you're thinking about investing billions of pounds into something, then, the last thing you want to do is tell your competitors what your plans are, because they might choose to do the very same thing and even better than you. And that's why I don't think, what Donald Trump has done has worked out too well. But it's not just Donald Trump. It's all world leaders. They've lost their composure, and they've lost their course on the path of which what they was actually elected to do, they don't. We clearly see this from all the world leaders. None of them stands out to me as an honest person with good intentions, so to speak. None of them. Because they come from families with rot in their ancestral lines. They have been corrupt to think that without the conscience of doing something wrong, they will never make any money, and they will run out of money at some point in their life, so they must continue being corrupt. This is something that's been taught to them, and that's why they behave so unconsciously in their behaviours. So have you noticed that? They can sleep at night knowing that they have just blew up a village, which also meant not only were the bad guys killed, but also innocents. Talking about children who did nothing as of yet. Wickedly, wrongly, they had no part in what was going on. They was just innocent children that were caught up in, that affair. But anyhow, I've given some good examples. I've told you the way I feel about robotics, and I've told you why I feel that further down the road, it will lead to no good, because man and woman will inevitably take these at some point as partners. People will say at this point, no, this will never happen. Trust me, it will happen. If you give man in this day and age the opportunity to have everything he wants, well, trust me, he will put his conscience aside and have that. And I will guarantee you this, with the fact and knowledge that I know that there are over 8 billion people in this world, but with the knowledge of 4 billion people in 1 week going on to pornographic websites, yes, half the population of this earth chooses to tune into pornographic material in 1 week, then I know that they will use these robots not only for company but also for pleasure. And I know you understand what I'm talking about, don't you? So I'm interested in your thoughts. Tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think what we're creating is an abomination and it is a wrong thing to do in creating it in human form, and not only human form, in the form of God, in his image? Are we doing the right thing or are we doing the wrong thing? You tell me in the comment section, guys. It's been emotional. I'll say what I usually do. You take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.